We live in a world where cosmetic surgery is no longer as taboo as it once was, and injectable fillers are becoming as normal as getting a facial these days. However, these procedures aren't entirely without risk, and what's worrying is that so many people have no idea what some of the risks are. So in today's When Beauty Turns Ugly, I'm going to share some stories which will hopefully make people more aware of these issues that you could potentially face when it comes to injecting things into your face. And that way you can make your own informed, educated decisions about what you want done and who you want it done by, most importantly. Spoiler alert, don't do it yourself, like the woman in our first story. Today's first story is pretty sad and a really troubling story actually, about a Korean woman named Hang Moiku who became so obsessed with plastic surgery that she even resorted to injecting cooking oil into her own face. A decision which left her horribly disfigured and just wishing that she could reverse time basically and not do it. Hang Moiku was naturally very attractive, as she'd been working as a fairly successful model and singer in the 1980s. But at the age of 28, perhaps starting to see a few signs of aging, she decided to have her first plastic surgery. 28 is when I first started having like Botox and filler done actually, in hopes to maintain her more like youthful appearance. She wasn't even that old, that's not that old. It's not clear exactly what the procedure was, but apparently she was very happy with the results and decided that she wanted more work done. And I'll be honest with you, it can get quite addictive. Once you like the results of filler, I have it on my nose, I used to get Botox in my forehead, I want it redone. I had it in my chin, my jawline at one time. You want to start experimenting and see what else can work or what doesn't work, you know? It can be relatively addictive. Before long, she had become obsessed with getting softer and smoother skin, and she even moved to Japan, partly because of her career, she wanted to take it further, also to get further operations done mostly on her face. Hang's first few procedures went relatively well and she looked great, but she had become addicted to plastic surgery and was obsessed with improving her looks and getting the perfect skin. She continued to have procedure after procedure after procedure until her face was left looking extremely enlarged and swollen, almost as if she'd had a really bad allergic reaction. It wasn't an allergic reaction, but even now, Hang wasn't ready to stop, but the plastic surgeons were. It was at this point that the surgeons she'd been visiting actually refused to carry out any more work on her face, with even some suggesting that her obsession could be a sign of a psychological disorder, and they were probably right, but Hang didn't want to believe it, so she returned to Korea hoping to find a new plastic surgeon to continue her pursuit of perfection. However, when she returned home, her features had changed so much that her own parents didn't even recognize her. After they finally accepted that this woman in front of them with a completely different face was really their daughter, her parents were understandably very concerned for her and convinced her to go and see a doctor. This doctor also thought that Hang was suffering from a mental disorder. I imagine probably body dysmorphia, but it's not specified. And luckily, between the doctor and her parents, Hang was this time convinced to seek psychiatric help and soon started being treated for her mental disorder. Unfortunately, the psychiatric treatment she was receiving was very expensive, and it wasn't long before Hang couldn't afford to continue with the sessions anymore. And because she wasn't getting the help that she needed, Hang couldn't help but revert back to her old ways. Somehow, she managed to find a doctor who was willing to give her more silicone injections. The legitimacy of this doctor is questionable though, because not only did he agree to give her more procedures when nobody else ethically would, he also gave her a syringe and her own supply of silicone so she could self-inject at home. And as shocking as this actually is, it's about to get a lot worse. Because when Hang ran out of her black market supply of silicone, that's when she resorted to injecting cooking oil directly into her face. Unsurprisingly, the results were not good. Her face had been worryingly swollen and enlarged for years now, but the cooking oil took it to a whole new level. Her face became so swollen and droopy that she almost didn't look human anymore. And apparently children in her neighborhood started calling her the standing fan because of how disproportionate her face looked to her body. I don't quite get that. The standing fan, and maybe because her head was so big and her body was slim. Hang's story soon caught the attention of Korean news outlets, and she was even featured on Korean TV. And her segment aired on TV. Many viewers felt so sorry for her that they donated money to help fund surgery to reduce the size of her face. During the first procedure, surgeons removed 60 grams of silicone, cooking oil, and other substances from her face and 200 grams from her neck. So after a total of 10 operations, they managed to greatly reduce the size of her face, but unfortunately, a lot of the damage was irreversible. The damage was already done, and she was still left scarred and disfigured. It's incredibly sad, really, that Han can see how stunning she was to begin with. She was a model, for fuck's sake. Like, she looked stunning, and she didn't get the mental health help she needed early enough and wasn't able to keep up when she did eventually get the help. It was too expensive for her. Her story could have been completely different had she got the help that she needed much earlier on. And there was a case of all these dodgy injectors that we have here in the UK too. Reportedly, though, she seemed to have had that aspect of her mental health under control at some point, being able to reflect back on what she had done to her face and seeing the damage that she had done, saying that all she wants now is her old face back. There are a few essays, no articles online, however, about an apparent suicide. During some research I did, I came across a few essays, not really articles, saying that Han Moiku had died by suicide. I can't confirm this whatsoever, to be honest with you. There's very little about her now, at least any in English that I could find. So if you know, please let me know in the comments down below. I very much hope that she was able to get help and that these essays or reports of her suicide are false. Han Moiku's story is of course tragic, but you don't have to necessarily have to be suffering from an underlying mental health disorder or issue to experience issues with filler. One example is the story of Carol Bryan, an American woman who was making it her mission to educate people on the dangers, very real dangers of cosmetic surgery after a filler gone wrong drove her to the brink of suicide. Carol says that she first started getting Botox in her late 30s and never had any issues. She was absolutely fine with the procedures, saying that it took years off her face. She loved it. She kept up with the Botox for over a decade and was happy with the results. However, when she turned 47, she said that she felt like she was losing some of the volume in her face. You know, you do as you get older. So she had a consultation with her cosmetic surgeon and was persuaded to try dermal fillers as a preventative aging measure. So she had her first dermal filler in 2009, and at first it all seemed fine. She had some minor bruising and swelling after the injections, but that's normal. You kind of get that, you know. It wasn't anything to be too worried about. But after a few months, the swelling hadn't really gone down. It had gotten steadily worse, in fact, particularly in her forehead area, and that shouldn't be happening. Apparently a mixture of silicone and another product, which is unspecified, were injected into the wrong part of her face. What exactly was wrong about where it was injected isn't exactly clear, but whatever it was, it went wrong. It didn't go well. Carol was becoming very, very concerned, and she underwent several extremely painful corrective procedures to try and reverse the damage to her face, but they couldn't have gone much worse. She said that her forehead was so heavy that it actually started to like fall down almost and started covering her eyes so that she couldn't see unless she taped her forehead up. In an interview with The Independent, she said, "My face began to swell and contract to the point where not only did I have to hide from my family and friends, I actually had to hide from myself, never looking in the mirror. I felt like I had the head of an alien." And because of her new appearance, Carol says that she became a recluse. She didn't feel comfortable going out in public, being seen by anyone, even herself, and hid herself in her home for almost 4 years. Carol has spoken pretty openly about her mental health struggles during all of this and admitted that she did even contemplate ending her life. Thankfully, she never followed through on those thoughts, and eventually, after so many years of isolation as well as physical and emotional pain, Carol's daughter had enough of seeing her mother suffering like this, and in 2013 she finally convinced Carol to seek help again. Together they started reaching out to hospitals all over the country, but only one would take her case. Dr. Reza Jarrah, who is co-director of the UCLA Craniofacial Clinic, was the only one who agreed to help her, I guess, who felt they could help her. Apparently by the time Carol presented herself to physicians at the UCLA, her condition was unprecedented. Like, I hadn't seen anything like this before. Dr. Reza Jarrah made her fully aware that there were unknown risks with the corrective procedures that they were going to attempt, I should say, and even if they worked, she'd never look the same as she used to. I mean, I think that's pretty obvious. A lot of damage was already done. The many surgeries Carol underwent to fix her face were very, very risky and incredibly painful. In fact, the initial surgery unfortunately resulted in Carol losing all sight in her right eye, and the largest first operation was a 16-hour procedure, which involved all the muscles and tissues being removed from her forehead and a large section of skin and tissue being removed from her back to replace the damaged skin on her forehead. And despite the loss of sight in one of her eyes, the procedures were a success overall, and Carol has said that she is now feeling more confident in herself. In the interview for The Independent, she actually said, "I feel amazing today. I am happy to be alive and in probably the best mental state I've ever known." Carol is now determined to warn people about the dangers of cosmetic surgery and the importance of visiting a board-certified plastic surgeon. And she was involved with the Saving Face initiative as director of the Face-to-Face Healing organization, which raises awareness of disfigurements. She has said that she wouldn't actually change what happened to her, regardless of how much she suffered, both physically and mentally, because it gave her a new worthy calling. She now campaigns for stricter regulations for practitioners and encourages others to carefully consider why they want cosmetic treatments in the first place. And to be fair, stricter regulations around cosmetic procedures, particularly fillers, is probably a good thing. It could only be a good thing, right? Especially as we may not know as much about them as we thought we did initially. For a long time, it was fairly widely accepted that hyaluronic acid fillers only lasted for between 6 to 18 months, with most clinics having patients back in for a reassessment after 12 months, at the most usually. I mean, I probably get my filler done once a year, twice a year at a push. However, over the past year, more and more stories have been coming out of hyaluronic acid fillers lasting much longer than they were apparently supposed to. Journalist and author Alice Hart Davis, who writes mostly about cosmetic procedures in general and beauty, published an article in January last year, 2023, discussing her own experience with dermal fillers. And her story is quite surprising, to be honest with you. Alice said in her article that along with everyone else, she had always thought that dermal fillers were temporary, right? You physically see them kind of disappear and go down, and you can get top-ups, so you think they go. Lasting for a year at most, before being absorbed into the body and disappearing. But after following the work of Dr. Mobin Master, an aesthetic radiologist from Australia, who has been investigating evidence that the fillers may actually last for up to 12 years, Alice decided to get an MRI of her face and see if there was any truth behind those claims. Now, she said that over the last 2 decades or more, she's probably had about 30 mil of filler injected into her face, but at the same time of the scan, apart from a small amount of lip filler, she had had no hyaluronic acid injected into her face for more than 3.5 years. So, when the MRI scan showed fillers still present in her cheeks, her jawline, her chin, under her eyes, in her nose, in her nasal labial folds, she was shocked. In fact, the radiologist said altogether that there was around 35 mil of filler still present in her face. She was particularly surprised to see this filler still appearing in her tear-through area, which she hadn't touched in almost 8 years, and in her nasal labial folds, which had been done over a decade ago. So when she asked how there could be 35 mil in there, where she only recalled getting at the most 30 mil injected in total, she was told that it may be because hyaluronic acid traps water, so it could be look like a larger amount in the scan, but it doesn't really matter how much there is, because based on what we get told about the longevity of filler, there shouldn't be any left in her face at all. Now, Alice was understandably a little worried about this, whether this could be having any negative effects on her health in general. The consultant radiologist she saw told her that at this stage, we don't know of any adverse effects on longevity, but injectables have been around for more than 2 decades, and there is little or no reporting of health concerns. So while that may be mostly true, there have been quite a few reports of health concerns resulting from dermal fillers, and it seems like reports of the issues are becoming more common, unfortunately. In fact, Dr. Catherine Ferris, president of the British College of Aesthetic Medicine, said that BCAM practitioners are seeing a rise in dermal filler complications. When it comes to HA fillers going wrong, people often say it isn't a huge issue because you can just get it dissolved, right? Anyone who is worth their money should be able to dissolve your filler using Hyalase, I believe it's called. And that is true a lot of the time, but Dr. Ferris added that not all fillers are actually dissolvable, and even if they are, if the filler has migrated into deep tissue, dissolving it may require surgery or more skilled input. So yeah, so you can get your filler dissolved in a lot of cases, but even then, it isn't guaranteed that dissolving the filler won't cause any issues, such as in our next story involving Elke. I love that name. I'm gonna call her Elke, an Australian woman who had her filler dissolved and suffered life-changing consequences. In an article for The Guardian Australia, Elke, which isn't her real name by the way, she just wanted to remain anonymous. She said that she decided to get filler in her lips at the end of the COVID lockdown in 2020. However, after visiting her family shortly after, she decided she wanted to get rid of it. I'm not sure what happened, if her family maybe made comments about it, or she just wasn't feeling it or something, but for whatever reason, she decided that she didn't want filler anymore. Fair enough, right? She should be able to dissolve it. So she found a practice that would dissolve the filler for her. They said they marketed this procedure to her as very routine. They'd done it before. They were so confident that they didn't really inform her of any of the risks associated with it. So soon after she had had her Hyalase, I think it's called, injected to dissolve her filler, Elke noticed changes in her face, and not just her lips as you might suspect. She said it was almost like immediate that she had a drop to one side of her face. She says, this was when my life changed forever, really. About 2 weeks in, I had what could only be described as bone-crushing, soul-crushing pain. Like someone had my head in a vice and I was sweating and sweating. Elke says that since the Hyalase injection, her skin has sagged and drooped, and she feels like it is still affecting her whole body almost 2 years on. Due to the severity of her symptoms, she's been unable to work. She had to move back close to her family for support. And in the same article, Guardian Australia says that they spoke to more than a dozen women who all say they have suffered the same side effects as a result of being injected with dissolver, Hyalase. Some of the women also say that they feel like they are being almost medically gaslit by practitioners in the cosmetic injectables industry. Hyalase is also known as hyaluronidase. You know me, I'm pronouncing ingredients. It's basically an enzyme commonly used in eye surgeries and other medical procedures to break down connective tissue and make the tissue between cells more permeable, basically, which allows injected substances to spread and absorb more rapidly. But it has also become commonplace in cosmetic injection clinics to remove dermal fillers. But it's also led to an increasing number of reports of some patients experiencing this burning pain, facial drooping, and increased skin elasticity, with many of these patients claiming that they weren't informed of any risks prior to the procedure at all, which is so bad. In the Guardian article from Australia again, they spoke to Dr. Naveen Samia, who is a surgeon based in Sydney, as well as former president of the Australian Society of Aesthetic Plastic Surgeons. And Dr. Samia said that Hyalurase was very effective at removing cosmetic filler, but that it carried a real risk of pretty bad reactions. Dr. Samia said that he believes that the enzyme would target and destroy some naturally occurring hyaluronic acid in the face as well, not just the stuff that's been injected, which makes sense when you think about it. Why would it just target that foreign body kind of thing? He said that it's reasonable to assume that if it's targeting hyaluronic acid, it does not discriminate between your normal hyaluronic acid and the hyaluronic acid in the filler. Obviously, if the Hyalase dissolves your already existing, naturally occurring hyaluronic acid in your face, as well as the injected hyaluronic acid, then you'll probably end up losing more volume in your face than what you even had to begin with, right, before the filler. So that volume you went in for, not only are you getting rid of that, but you're getting rid of your naturally occurring volume too. It is worrying that the people injecting us may not know as much about the product we're being injected with as we assume and would like to think that they do. And it's not just what these injections contain that we have to worry about, but also how they're injected. My last story for you today is possibly the most horrifying one, as if the others weren't bad enough. It made me feel a little bit ill, to be honest with you, and similar to our first story, Krista Carson has also been working as a singer and a model for many, many years, and has started her journey into cosmetic injections in her late 20s. In an article for the New York Post, Krista said she'd been getting Botox injections for 20 years with no issues. But in her late 40s, she became dissatisfied with her appearance, particularly because her husband is 10 years younger than her, and on several occasions, she had been mistaken for his mother-in-law, basically. Understandably, this was upsetting for her, and she decided she needed to do something about it. Well, she wanted to do something about it. So in 2015, Krista visited visited a cosmetic surgeon to get filler injections. In the article, she said, "I felt like I was really safe and in really good hands, so I signed the consent form, which just had some warnings about bruising and swelling and a risk of infection. I didn't see anything else that concerned me at all." The first injection went fine, absolutely fine. She was happy with how it looked and she didn't have any issues at all. So she started getting injections into her smile lines on a yearly basis. And this was all going perfectly fine until the 12th of October 2020. The injection she received on that day seemed perfectly normal to her at first. This had become fairly routine for her. However, when she got home that day, she started experiencing like a numbing and tingling sensation in her face, which was actually starting to begin to swell and causing her slurred speech. Obviously, Krista was worried about these symptoms, as she should have been, and she decided to call the surgeon's office the next morning, as her symptoms had been getting progressively worse instead of better. The surgeon she had seen told her to come in straight away, basically, because obviously that's not a normal symptom. So after assessing her symptoms, he left the room before finally coming back in looking nervous, at which point he admitted that he had hit a blood vessel during the injection. Unbelievably, all her surgeon did at this point was give her an ointment to put on the injection site and tell her it would be fine in a few weeks before sending her away. I don't even know what to say, like that's insane. That is ridiculous. Over the next few days, Krista watched helplessly as the left side of her face swelled shut, rendering her unable to eat or speak for weeks. Then her skin began to blister, it turned black. Speaking about the ordeal in another article for The Mirror, Krista said, "I was terrified and confused and just did whatever they suggested, waiting for more information. When I would go back to the office every day, he still never told me that I could get necrosis and loose pieces of my face. He kept saying it's going to get worse before it gets better, but you're probably going to be fine in about 6 weeks." Obviously, that wasn't the case though. It's just a couple of weeks later on Halloween, Krista was applying the ointment when all of a sudden, part of her nose fell off. She said, "My entire nostril just detached and was dangling there by a tiny piece of flesh. I was in shock and terrified." And that's perfectly understandable. I'd be in shock. I'd be terrified too if that happened to me. Like, what the fuck is going on? Krista was having this horrifying reaction to the injection because, as she soon found out, the botched filler had caused a vascular occlusion, which occurs when the injected fluid cuts off oxygen and nutrients to the skin. While usually not quite this severe, especially if dealt with properly and as soon as possible, Krista's case was particularly bad to the point where she experienced a level of necrosis, similar to severe cases of frostbite basically. In a post written by herself on Medium, Krista says that she thought that the surgeon believed himself to be too skilled to make a mistake, so he had never warned her about the serious risk of this happening and that he had no idea how to treat it. Basically, when it happened, she says he just kept trying different things and telling me it was all going to be fine in a few weeks' time. She said, "I trusted him and did everything he told me to do to recover from this injury, but nothing he tried did any good and nothing he told me turned out to be true." After Krista's nostril had fallen off, she went to meet her doctor at his office and he brought his wife along because she was a dermatologist. She said at this meeting they were both trying to make it to be like not a big deal, like, "Oh no, it's, you know, your nostrils falling off, so what?" She says that they assured me that they would be able to fix it all within a couple of months. "My doctor said he knew of several different surgeries to recreate my nostril, and his wife said I would have some bumpy scars that she could smooth out with lasers, but that I should be able to go back to work by sometime in January. She even said my left side would likely be my good side from now on, because my scar will tighten the skin, as she gave me her own line of skincare products to use on my wounds." Oh my god, they're pissing me off so bad. The doctor wrapped up my face and told me to come in for a bandage change every few days so I would not have to look at my bloody disfigured flesh, and promised he would keep it that way until he repaired it basically, so I would never have to see myself in that state. She goes on to say that she didn't know if they were both lying, basically trying to completely hide what was really going on from her and trying to hide it from the whole medical community, or if they just had no idea what they were doing or talking about. To me, it sounds like they're trying to avoid a lawsuit. She goes on to say that basically nothing was happening the way they said that it was going to, and that she was becoming very, very sick. She said that she was so scared and so lost that she was seriously contemplating suicide. Without the proper care from her quack doctor, shall we say. Her condition continued to worsen, obviously, and soon much of her nose and face was blackened and looked like it was rotting away. Which it was. The flesh on her face was literally dying. Horrified at seeing her face literally falling off, Krista finally went to get a second opinion from a doctor who specialized in reconstructive surgery, and it was here that she realized her doctor was not going to be able to keep any of his promises that he had made to her, and that he had no idea what he was fucking doing. Speaking about the new doctor, she said, "He took my bandages and handed me a mirror and said it's not going to grow back." That was a really rude awakening, she says. "I really didn't realize until that day I was just gone." She says that's when she lost her will to live. She says she knew she couldn't work. She said, "I've been working as a model and singer for 30 years, and you can't do a lot without a face." The whole ordeal was understandably extremely traumatizing for Krista. I'm actually like welling up a little bit. Like, that must be horrible. Like, horrible, horrible, horrible. Since then, she's been diagnosed with PTSD, has serious concentration issues, and horrible nightmares all the time. That's on top of all the physical impairments she suffered from the injury as well. She says that everything that happened on the surface of her face also happened on the inside. So now she has a deviated septum, shriveled navel passages, as well as severe mucus problems, issues with her breathing, and random heavy nosebleeds. Unfortunately, as Krista was unable to afford reconstructive surgery, she has had to settle with wearing a prosthetic nostril outfitted with a nasal stent so that she can actually breathe. Despite all this, the cosmetic surgeon who botched the procedure has never offered Krista a settlement or helped pay for any reconstructive surgery, and never even offered to pay for the prosthetics that she now has to use. Krista has documented her harrowing health journey on TikTok, where she goes by @disfiguredbeauty, as she hopes that her story will help dissuade others from making the same mistakes that she did. She says, "It's really important to me that this doesn't happen to anyone else. If I was using this for years thinking that it's totally safe, there could be people thinking the exact same." And that really is what this video is all about. Not necessarily to put you off getting these kind of procedures done. I have them done all the time. Not all the time. I have them done fairly often. But to make sure that you're aware of the risks associated with them. If you go and see any good practitioner, injector, I don't know what they like to be called, you should be aware of these consequences. In your initial consultation, before they even touch you, you should be fully aware of everything that can happen to your face, which is why it's so horrible about Krista, because saying that they hit a blood vessel, with the consultation I had, I know that that was a case to get that melted straight away, go to the hospital right away, because my injector made me fully aware of what could potentially happen, although rare, could happen. Bruising and swelling are the only consequences. Because as commonplace as dermal fillers are these days, there are still risks involved. So that's why it's so important to go to somebody who not only makes you aware of the risks and make sure you understand them, but also knows what to do if something goes wrong. Unlike a lot of these so-called professionals discussed in this video who didn't seem to know what they were doing at all and were more worried about gaslighting their victims than actually helping them out, bringing stricter regulations around these kind of non-surgical cosmetic procedures has been talked about for a long time here in the UK and the rest of the world. In fact, an independent review of the cosmetic procedures industry in the UK carried out by the NHS Medical Director Sir Bruce Cole and released in April 2013 recommended that all practitioners should be properly qualified, carry out all the procedures they offer, and that an ombudsman, which is basically somebody who's appointed to look into complaints about these companies and organizations, basically should be instated to oversee all private healthcare, including cosmetic procedures, to help those who have been treated poorly. Unfortunately, the government at the time rejected the recommendation to establish a register of licensed practitioners, and to this day there still isn't any licensing required to carry these procedures out. However, the Joint Council for Cosmetic Procedures is continuing to push for the design and promotion of a safe and equitable licensing scheme for non-surgical procedures, work which is supported by the British Beauty Council, who get a lot of shit done. So hopefully we'll soon have some level of regulation of these procedures in the UK, and we can avoid more people being affected by the issues we've seen in today's video.